Brandon Michael Chicklis was born on July 24, 1997, in Lowell, Massachusetts, to Paul Chicklis and Tricia. He was described as a trustworthy and loyal individual with a heart of gold. He was a member of the ROTC at the Monty Tech High School and graduated in 2015. He enjoyed the outdoors and spent 10 years as a member of the Boy Scouts, achieving the rank of Life Scout with Troop 41 in Fitchburg. While in high school, he met and later began dating Julia Enright, a small-town girl with a desire to become a doctor. By the age of 20, Brandon was working at a local HVAC company. Then, on June 23, 2018, he left Westminster, Massachusetts, to visit his father in Windham, New Hampshire, but strangely never arrived. By the next day, when there was still no sign of him, his family reported him missing. A week later, his 2010 gray Honda Civic was found in the parking lot of a Hannaford supermarket in Rindge, New Hampshire, with the keys inside and the doors unlocked. Then, over 2 weeks later, on July 10, 2018, his body was found by a jogger about 6 miles from where his car had been found. His remains were wrapped in a blanket and 2 dark trash bags that were duct taped. The medical examiner used dental records to identify him and found numerous stab wounds on his body, ruling his death a homicide. State police detectives obtained call detail records for his cell phone, and it placed him at the Enright's home in Ashburnham from 11:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. on June 23, 2018, and that's where his phone activity ceased. Investigators then asked Julia to come in for questioning, which she did on July 13, 2018. While there, police seized her car after Trooper Sean Murphy said he walked around the Prius looking for any dents or damage and saw dark stains on the floor mat behind the driver's seat that he believed could be blood. A briefcase or computer bag was also seen in the back seat. Police later obtained a search warrant for the vehicle. Samples of the stains were sent for testing and positively identified as blood. The samples were then sent for DNA testing and matched Brandon's DNA. They then got a search warrant for the Enright home, and what they found shocked everyone. Inside a treehouse on the property were numerous documents, notebooks, and business cards that showed Julia was a dominatrix who was paid by men to participate in activities related to BDSM. The treehouse had even been fitted with restraints. They also strangely found a new rug in the treehouse. When it was removed, they found blood that had seeped down through the floorboards. There was also blood on the stairs and under the treehouse. During questioning by the police, Julia initially provided varying accounts of what had occurred on the day in question, before finally admitting that Brandon had been to her house on the day he disappeared. She said they smoked cannabis and drank alcohol before being intimate in his car. When asked about the treehouse, she said she had brought friends there in the past, but denied being in there that day with Brandon. She claimed that Brandon left to buy drugs and never returned. However, the blood from the treehouse, just like her Prius, belonged to Brandon. Investigators determined that she had lured Brandon to the property with the promise of a hookup, but instead killed him to please her lover, Jonathan Lind. She was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her boyfriend, Lind, was also arrested. Investigators would eventually learn that she had restrained Brandon in the treehouse with the new restraints and then stabbed him to death. Turns out that Julia had an obsession with dead things and even collected roadkill to make bone art. This is also why she wanted to become a doctor, because she loved human anatomy. They also found journal entries where she said she fantasized about killing people. There was also a note that indicated that she wanted to cure the world of overpopulation. Julia was asked about the notes and acknowledged writing them, but claimed they were for a creative writing class. Also written in her diary, she explained how she intentionally got pregnant to go to Planned Parenthood to try to steal or bribe an employee for a fetus specimen for her collection. At trial, her boyfriend, Jonathan Lind, testified that they would cut each other and spread blood over their bodies during sex. He said the treehouse had to be cleaned and the carpet replaced because he defecated on the floor during one of their encounters. Surveillance footage captured Julia at a Home Depot store buying carpet on June 26, 2018. In the end, she was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 25 years. At John Lynn's trial, Brandon's mother testified that Lynn could have revealed the location of Brandon's remains during those 17 days he was missing and argued he should receive the maximum perjury sentence of 20 years. However, in February 2025, he was sentenced to only 7 to 9 years in prison. Catherine Blackburn, who went by Kate, was born on March 1, 1914, in Albany, New York. In 1938, she married Jesse Blackburn, Jr., who went by Jess. They never had children together, and in 1964, they separated. So Kate, now living alone, decided to rent out a room in the upstairs apartment in her home. She placed ads in the newspaper and painted the rental unit. That weekend, as she finished the painting job, she began showing the property to potential renters. However, one of those potential renters only had evil intentions. On September 13, 1964, after a few days of no word from Kate, her family became concerned. The last time anyone had spoken to her was a few days earlier when she hurriedly got off the phone with her sister when a potential tenant arrived. That morning, a coworker of Catherine's attempted to pick her up to go to work, but when Kate didn't come to the door, she contacted Kate's niece, 19-year-old Sandy Carmichael, to try to figure out what was going on. Sandy and Kate's sister entered the home and made a terrifying discovery. Kate had been dead alone in the house for several days, and it looked like a horror scene from a movie. Kate was struck in the back of the head and stabbed in the neck, then sexually assaulted while she was unconscious, before the killer heated up 3 knives on her gas stove and burned shapes onto her skin. Even though this was years before DNA technology, investigators still collected blood samples, a footprint in the yard, and slips of paper believed to be connected to the killer. Investigators learned that Kate had recently canceled newspaper ads to rent out the room and painted the rental unit the same weekend she was killed. Investigators found a slip of paper with the same numbers as the house, 117, and a receipt torn from Kate's receipt book. Investigators were able to read the name on the missing receipt by examining pen impressions on the next sheet of paper in the book. That name did not lead to any known person and was determined to likely be fictitious. They also looked into a famous killer such as the Boston Strangler, but none turned out to be the killer. The case would go cold for decades, until 2023, when DNA evidence from the attack and sexual assault was submitted to Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could aid in identifying the suspect. From there, genealogists provided the name Joseph Nowakowski to investigators. Since he had died in 1998, investigators had his body exhumed from the Albany Rural Cemetery. His DNA was then compared with the DNA from the crime scene, and it was a match. Nowakowski was born in 1931 and was convicted of a similar assault of an elderly woman in Schenectady, New York, in 1973. He was 33 at the time of Kate's murder and was in and out of prison most of his adult life until his death. In fact, he was released from state prison in 1980 and lived under the radar for 20 more years. There is no indication that he and Kate knew each other, and Nowakowski was not a suspect in the 1964 investigation. Investigators are now looking into other crimes that Nowakowski could be connected to. Diedre Christine Harm was born on November 16, 1984, in Woodstock, Illinois, to parents Scott and Gail Itzen. At the age of 22, she lived in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and was the mother of a 4-month-old baby daughter named Vegas. On June 10, 2006, Diedre left her daughter Vegas with a babysitter and then went out for the night. She started at the Finish Line bar before going to the New Body Shop Tavern a block away. After that, she was never seen alive again. The next day, when neither her family nor the babysitter could get in touch with her, they reported her missing. Months went by with no answers. Then, in November 2006, her remains were found in a wooded area known as Blueberry Ridge, which is about 5 miles from the downtown area. Her cause of death has never been publicly released. Her murder would then go unsolved for the next 19 years. The night she was murdered, witnesses said they saw a man hanging around Diedre at the downtown bars. While they couldn't identify him at the time, in 2009, they got a big break when he was arrested and his DNA tied him to the crime. The man was Christopher Revak, and one of the witnesses identified him as the man seen around Diedre that night. Revak's 2009 arrest was for the murder of Renee Williams. However, he would never stand trial because he took his own life in jail a day after being arrested. Investigators then spoke to Revak's wife, Johanna, and she confirmed they had been in Wisconsin around the time of the murder, visiting family. She said when he showed back up at the house that night, he had muddy clothes and mud on his truck. When asked where he had been, he said the Blueberry Ridge area, the same location as Diedre's remains. 2 of Revak's high school friends told detectives that when they were younger, they often used the area to drink so they wouldn't be busted by cops. The day after Diedre vanished, Johanna said he asked her to cut his hair. She also caught him deleting photos from his phone, and then he strangely tried to recreate them with the same clothes. As for the murder of Renee Williams, Johanna told police that Revak admitted to the murder and even asked her for help in moving her body, threatening to kill her if she refused. He murdered her after picking her up and propositioning her with a threesome, which she refused. This angered him, and he strangled her to death. He's also a suspect in the disappearance of KIMT morning anchor Jody Husentrut. She vanished around 4 a.m. on June 27, 1995, after calling a colleague to say she was on her way to the office. After her disappearance, investigators found evidence of a struggle outside her apartment, including a pair of high heels and a bent car key. Sadly, she has never been found, and in 2001, she was declared legally dead. Revak's girlfriend had lived near Jody, and it's suspected that he attacked and kidnapped her outside her home as she was leaving to go to work. While justice can never be served, the district attorney confirmed that if Revak were still alive, he would most certainly be charged with Diedre's murder. Robin Warr Lawrence was born on November 25, 1956, and married Ollie Lawrence on New Year's Eve, 1989. 3 years later, they welcomed their daughter, Nicole. Sadly, Nicole had to quickly undergo a liver transplant after birth, but she persevered with her parents by her side and daily immunosuppressants she would have to take for the rest of her life. They lived in Springfield, Virginia, where Robin worked in the advertising industry and Ollie was an airline executive. In Robin's spare time, she took ballet classes and was described as a personable, fun-loving individual. She had earned a degree in fine art from Carnegie Mellon University and was then selected to design the first medal for the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Peace Prize, which was awarded to Rosa Parks. However, on November 20th, 1994, their worlds came crashing down when Robin's friend Laurie found Robin stabbed to death in her home and 2-year-old Nicole wandering around scared, alone, and hungry. Laurie called 911 and rushed Nicole to the hospital because she wasn't sure how long it had been since she took her daily medication. Unfortunately, Ollie was out of town for the weekend. Back at the scene, investigators determined that a struggle had occurred, and due to all the defensive wounds, it was apparent Robin had tried to fight off her attacker. Her killer had also cut the phone cord to the phone that was found next to her. Investigators determined that the suspect entered through a window off the back deck, the same one Laurie used to gain entry to the home. As for a time frame, it was estimated that she had been murdered 2 days prior to being found, and 2-year-old Nicole roamed the house all alone. During that time, she had tried to use tissues to clean the blood off her mother and had brought all of her empty baby bottles and laid them next to her. Everyone was at a loss as to who could have committed this heinous crime. Robbery didn't appear to be the motive because the cash and jewelry in the bedroom were all left behind. To investigators, this meant that she was likely the target and killed by someone she knew. Ollie was questioned, and while he was cooperative, investigators learned some damning information. He had been having an affair with a colleague. This immediately shot him to the top of the suspect list. However, the business trip had been to the Bahamas, and it would have been impossible for him to commit the crime. Investigators even flew to the Bahamas to confirm his alibi. Detectives also interviewed Ollie's lover, but found no evidence she was involved. As Robin's family mourned her death, investigators pieced together a timeline and determined that the last time anyone had heard from Robin was around 6 p.m. on Friday, November 18th, and they believe she was killed around 9:30ish, with her body being discovered 2 days later. Investigators had little else to go on, since no fingerprints were found at the scene, but there was one thing that caught their eye. On the towel rod next to the sliding tub door was a washcloth, and he noticed a small dark stain on it. That stain turned out to be blood, and authorities extracted DNA from it. Multiple people close to the family, including Ollie, were tested, but no one matched. The DNA was then uploaded to CODIS, but with no matches there either, the case stalled. Decades later, in 2019, investigators enlisted the help of Parabon Nanolabs. Their analysis showed Robin's killer likely had European ancestry, but tracing him through his relatives proved nearly impossible, as they were all so distantly related. That's when an amateur genealogist named Liz, who was also a volunteer with the police department, agreed to take on the case. Liz was given information on the killer's ethnicity, which included Irish, and was also given a list of over 1,000 fourth and fifth cousins who shared his DNA. In 2021, Parabon was asked to create a phenotyping sketch of Robin's killer. It was determined that the man likely had fair to very fair skin color, dark blue eyes, and a larger than average chin. However, no one in Robin's family recognized the person, including Ollie. She eventually traced the man's ancestors to Canada. She continued to piece together the family tree and was eventually led to a man named Stephen Smirk. She provided the name to investigators, who began looking into him and soon discovered that he was a computer programmer in Niskayuna, New York, married to a defense attorney with 2 high school-aged children, a nice house in the suburbs, and no more than a speeding ticket on his record. They were starting to think he may not be their guy until they found his yearbook photo that showed him at the age of 16, and it looked very similar to the phenotyping sketch. Smirk, now 52 years old, was visited at his home by investigators, who were hoping he would willingly provide them a sample of his DNA, and that's exactly what he did, even after they told him they were there from Virginia to talk about Robin Lawrence. During the visit, he strangely showed no expression, and investigators said his demeanor was very unusual. After collecting his DNA, investigators checked into their hotel, and not long after, they received a very unexpected call. It was Smirk, and he was ready to confess. He said he had gone to the Niskayuna Police Department to turn himself in, but the doors were locked, so the detective told him to call 911, which he did. On September 7th, 2023, after he was taken into custody, Smirk began his confession. He first asked them to remind him of her name. He said he remembered she was black, but couldn't remember anything else. He said he was a serial killer and that the murder of Robin was intentional and his only victim. However, investigators were skeptical of that claim. He told them that in November 1994, he was a 22-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia, and on the night of the murder, he had been drinking beer and taking ephedrine pills, which is a strong stimulant. He said something inside him had just always known that he was going to kill somebody someday, but he just didn't know who. He said it was hard to explain, but it was like an overbearing thought in his brain that he just had to do it. Smirk said he drove to Robin's neighborhood because he was familiar with the area, having visited friends who stayed in a house nearby. He said he didn't know her or even know who lived there. He confirmed he entered the house from the back deck and told detectives he was wearing a ski mask and leather gloves. He said he went in and noticed that she had a baby in one of the rooms, and then proceeded down the hall to Robin's bedroom. He said he used all his military training, including hand-to-hand combat, to murder her. He said he's highly influenced by demons, and one of the reasons he enlisted in the military was because he wanted to kill. He said his wife and kids were the only reason he never killed again. They then asked him about the washcloth in the bathroom with his blood stain on it. He said Robin had clawed his face, and he still had small scars from it, which he showed the detectives. At the end of the interview, Smirk was asked if he wanted to express any remorse to Robin's family. He declined, saying he didn't feel anything for the family and didn't even feel bad about what he had done. He was then placed under arrest and charged with Robin's murder. A week later, DNA testing confirmed that Smirk's DNA matched the blood found on the washcloth. On April 15, 2024, a grand jury indicted him, but he would never go to trial because 6 months later, he took a plea deal for first-degree murder. Smirk had been diagnosed with bipolar II disorder, which he constantly fed with ephedra and alcohol. In 2004, ephedra was banned by the FDA because when it was mixed with other substances, it could trigger dangerous psychiatric side effects. By the time Smirk was arrested, he had already sought help for his mental health problems and had become sober. But there was still no remorse, and in the end, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison with the possibility of parole. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21, 1993, in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to parents George and Susie. At the age of 7, she and her family moved from Arcadia, Nebraska, to Neely, Nebraska. Sydney was described as a caring individual with a loving and kind heart, who was also very passionate about animals. After graduating from Neely Oakdale High School in 2011, she moved to Lincoln and began working at Menard's, a home improvement store on North 27th Street. In her free time, she enjoyed fishing and golfing and spoiled her beloved cat, Mimsy. Unfortunately, Sydney struggled with anxiety and depression, and by 2017, her struggles with her mental health had taken a toll on her. She was now calling in sick because the depression was so debilitating. Unsure what to do, she called and confided in her family, who in turn helped her schedule a doctor's appointment. Sadly, that was the last conversation they ever had together. Not long after, she decided to meet up with a woman she met on Tinder. Unbeknownst to Sydney, the woman, who was using the alias Audrey, had nothing but evil intentions planned. Her real name was Bailey Boswell, and she had a boyfriend named Aubrey Trail. Together, they devised a diabolical plan to murder Sydney. Their first date occurred on November 14, 2017, at Boswell's apartment in Wilber, about 40 miles south of Lincoln. The date was held in the basement apartment that Boswell and Aubrey had been renting for the past 6 months. The date went fine, and they made plans for the following day, with Sydney confirming twice that she and Boswell would be the only ones at the second date. Sydney was clearly excited and had even posted on Snapchat the caption that read, "Ready for my date." Cell tower data showed Boswell traveling from Sydney's rental home to Wilber. Meanwhile, Trail was back at his and Boswell's basement apartment, putting up plastic tarps and tents. The last communication from Sydney's phone was at 8:32 that night. After leaving with Boswell, she was never seen alive again. The next day, she failed to show up for work and never called to inform them. Concerned, coworkers went to her home to check on her, but there was no answer at the door. Her mother, Susie, also tried texting and calling, but received no answer. She was unaware of Sydney's plans and reported her missing the following day. Investigators checked her rental home and found all the lights on, her car in the driveway, and her purse still on the kitchen counter. What immediately concerned them was that Sydney's cat had no food or water, something she would have never let happen. After investigators learned about Sydney's date from Tinder, they contacted Tinder, and that's how they learned about Bailey Boswell. Once they began looking into her, they also learned about her boyfriend, Aubrey. The two were questioned, and while Boswell admitted to the date, she said she had dropped Sydney off at a friend's house afterward and never heard from her again. However, days later, the landlord began complaining about a strong smell of bleach coming from the basement apartment. Police went to the apartment and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Using a key from the landlord, they entered and were immediately hit with the smell of bleach. They also found the AC running, even though it was only in the mid-50s outside. On November 28th, Boswell and Trail were publicly named persons of interest. Once they discovered this, they started a Facebook live stream and began defending themselves, saying the first date involved her and Sydney driving the car around and smoking cannabis. She continued lying, saying she dropped Sydney off at a friend's home after the second date.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and a few other names because I have warrants, but this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney, and I'm just kind of want to tell you what I've already told the Lincoln police more than one time. I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off. I dropped her off at home, picked her up the next night at her house. We drove around, smoked weed again, made our way to my house where we smoked wax and shatter, and I gave her a 1/4 ounce of some really good weed. I went to take her home, and she asked me to drop her off at a friend's house, so I did so. I gave her my number. We were planning to go to the casino that weekend. I haven't heard from her since. I really don't even know what else to say. I've been seeing all this stuff on the news presses and the magazines and the news, and I guess I just want the family to know that I'm truly sorry and I didn't have anything to do with this, and I hope that Sydney is found very soon. She is a sweet, amazing girl. I don't know. Babe, do you have anything else to say?
I hope also that Sydney's found soon. We wish the family the best. We're sorry you're going through this.
By the 30th, police set out to arrest them on fraud charges and located them at a motel in Branson, Missouri. In their possessions were maps, sleeping bags, and hiking shoes, along with a plan to escape to Mexico. However, there was still no sign of Sydney. 3 weeks later, over a 48-hour period, Sydney's remains were found scattered in ditches along a state highway, about 60 miles from where she was murdered. They also found sex toys and other items wrapped inside multiple 30-gallon black trash bags that were left alongside a gravel road north of Edgar, Nebraska, about an hour west of Wilber. After the gruesome discovery, Trail shockingly confessed, but claimed he acted alone. Boswell agreed and maintained her innocence. However, evidence would prove otherwise when store receipts and video footage showed the couple purchasing bleach, saws, and trash bags shortly before the murder. Cameras also recorded them checking into a Best Western hotel together in Lincoln, near the Menards store where Sydney was employed. Then, cell tower data from their cell phones showed them waiting near Sydney's home before she left for work, and then it showed them following behind her to Menards. Trail then went inside and purchased an air freshener, cotton cord, Drano, protein bars, a thermometer, and lighters. The next day, they went to the Aardvark Antique Mall and bought a folding saw and a food grinder. They were also caught at a Dollar General buying the 30-gallon trash bags and 2 gallons of Clorox bleach. These last items were bought mere hours before the second date with Sydney. The tools used to dismember Sidney have never been located. At some point, Trell tried to change his confession, telling the FBI that his job was to make movies for special kinds of kinks. He said he was paid by people who wanted to see these movies, and he used their money to pay people such as Sidney. However, no proof of this was ever found. Investigators then received some very damning information. After Boswell and Trell were arrested, 3 women came forward and said they met Boswell on Tinder and were introduced to Trell. They spoke about the couple's desires to record victims as they tortured and killed them, and said they planned to sell the videos. Trell told them he thought he could get $1 million for one of them. While in jail, the couple communicated via coded letters in order to get their stories straight, but those ciphers were easily decoded. During the trial, Trell, who was in a wheelchair, shocked the courtroom when he shouted out, "Bailey is innocent and I curse you all." He then attempted to slash his own neck with a smuggled razor fragment. He was rushed to the hospital and found to have only superficial wounds. In the end, both were found guilty of first-degree murder. Trell was also found guilty of criminal conspiracy to commit murder. A 3-judge panel then unanimously agreed to sentence Trell to death, while Boswell was given life in prison. They were also found guilty and sentenced for defrauding hundreds of thousands of dollars from interstate coin buyers. So what turned this couple into murderers? During the trial, they discussed their childhoods. Boswell was raised in Leon, Iowa, where, as an infant, her father was murdered. She excelled at school athletics, topping the list of fastest runners on her relay team and scoring dozens of points in basketball games. She was even offered a scholarship to play college basketball. However, she threw it all away due to drug abuse. She then had 1 daughter and married a man named Freddie Pennell, who was allegedly physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive. He was also an addict, which resulted in them losing custody of their child. At some point, Boswell went on to the now-defunct sex marketplace, Backpage, alleging that she was looking for a sugar daddy, and that's where she met Trell. His childhood was worse than Boswell's. He was abused by his parents at the age of 2 before his grandfather took him in. However, he eventually returned to living with his mother, and while there, he was abused by his stepfather. He was eventually placed in foster care, where he moved from one home to the next. He eventually ended up in a juvenile facility before landing himself in prison in Tennessee at the age of 17 after he robbed a motel at gunpoint. Thankfully, Boswell and Trell will spend the rest of their lives behind bars and can never hurt another innocent person again.